Alright, so today we're going to talk about lightmap UVs and creating lightmap channels and light baking inside of Unreal. It's kind of a big topic, and in a lot of ways it can be more challenging than developing regular textures. So right here you can see the only part we're going to focus on right now. This is kind of my test bed scene where I just throw in everything and kind of play with it and do what I need to do before I bring it into a real scene that I care about. So this is the balcony that we're going to be focusing on right now. This actually is a light map, and you can tell it's a light map because if we move a, say, barrel, well, actually I think I moved that barrel before, you can actually see the bake from the previous position of the barrel. Same with this one. This might better demonstrate it. Actually, I think, let me see here. Maybe I moved the sun. Alright, well, this is good actually. So we'll actually just bake. We'll bake what we have right now. Yeah, I did, because I had a bunch of these copied. So in order, while you're testing light maps, what you want to do is try to test various positions and see where your shadows are falling, where some of these seams are. If you look at some of these seams, and you'll notice that you kind of get kind of cut off shadows in some areas. You want to kind of correct as much of that as possible. It's kind of expected nowadays that you're going to have some seams in a light map bake, but you want to try to reduce them as low as possible. Now some of that is going to be light map tweaks that you're going to have to do by altering your UVs, and some of that is going to be in your world settings. So some of that you're actually just going to go into your world settings and adjust things like indirect lighting smoothness, which will kind of clamp your shadows down a little bit from the indirect contribution. And things like ambient occlusion and these types of things, you want to make sure that they're clamped in, especially if you're using low resolution light maps, which we want to do in any kind of urban scene where you would have a massive amount of instancing for all your geometry. Each time you instance one of these pieces of geometry, obviously it's going to create an instance of itself, of its own light map in that specific position for that instance. So that's why it's important to actually have each of these pieces of your modular set, if you're working in modularity, to have its own unique individual light map of its own. Now when you look at some of these light maps, you're going to think they're really inefficient, they're not utilizing texture space, and there's a reason for that, because light maps, you want to be even, especially for a modular set like this. If we look at, say, this piece right here, we're going to switch over to the UV1 channel, right? Now if you look at that, you think, I know I do, as you know, as anybody with texture experience is going to think, wow, that's really underutilized UV space. But unfortunately with light maps, you can only go as large as your largest unit. So what you need, and what you need to shoot for, is uniformity between light maps rather than utilizing all of the light map space. And obviously you want to, especially for modularity, you want to make sure that your high visible items are getting the most amount of view, and that your low visible items are getting the least amount of texture resolution or light map resolution. The problem with that comes when you're unsure and you have multiple angles that you might be viewing the object. So you might think that, okay, well, the underside here doesn't need a whole lot. This would be like one of the underside pieces right here, these two pieces. This is the floor, and one of them's the kind of ceiling asset here. So there is a seam right here. It's really difficult to see, but if you were to, say, shrink that down really low just on that one seam portion, and then it were to take a different angle, you don't know that the shadows are going to fall like you would expect, because it has to sometimes with light maps, it may look good in one angle, and then you'll turn it around and bake the light map, or bake the lighting, and the next thing you know, it's a mess, because it's not previewing correctly. So we'll go ahead and build lighting here real quick. It should be a relatively quick build. I think we're building on medium, so generally I try to avoid even building on preview, because preview tends to just give really messy stuff. Let's see here. I'll make sure we got. I think I re-imported all of my geometry here. Yeah. So here's our new bake, right? And it looks like it baked pretty well. I've got some seams. They're not too terrible. And this is a pretty acceptable bake. There's some issues. Like we got some things going on here. It looks like there's very clearly some problems with this tile for whatever reason, and that's just the kind of fun that you have with baking light maps. So we'll move that, and you can see all the shadows are correctly going across seams, so that's good. We got some dark spots, so we know we got to take care of some dark spots here, and some of these might be world settings tweaks, and we got some really bad ugliness going on the inside of here, so we might need to clamp some of the indirect lighting contribution for shadows, or that might be acceptable if you have a darker texture on some of these items. Sometimes a lot of that can mask some of the light mass errors or light baking errors that you get. So it's by far not a perfect process, but it's not really feasible to have dynamic lighting with this many objects that you're seeing. So you're kind of stuck with what you get. Obviously, if you tweak the build, the lighting quality to high or production, you're going to get some better quality light maps. And one thing that you definitely want to avoid, but you can do, is raise your light map resolution. You want to try to avoid raising it too high, because if you raise it too high, especially for assets that are being kind of reused, I'm just going to test the collision here real quick. Make sure everything imported correctly. I think everything did. Looks good. Hold on 1 second. Oh, maybe we got some missing collision. Looks like we're missing collision on one of the items. No, I think we're good. Okay. So yeah. Right. So okay. Going back to what we were talking about here, when you're baking out for light maps, especially for modularity, you want to make sure you're not going over like 64. 128 is probably acceptable, and in most cases. And for larger items, what you want to do is kind of think about, okay, so I'm using a 64 by 64 map for my light map resolution on these small assets. Now, when I start scaling up for these larger assets, obviously they're going to take up more space, and I'm going to need a larger light map resolution for these larger pieces of wall if I want to maintain kind of this quality level here. So I might push, while I may have 64 by 64 by 64 on these balcony pieces, when I go to do these walls, I'm going to amp that up just a little bit and push it probably to 128 by 128, just so that the textile density will remain relatively close. You're not going to get a perfect match, but you'll get it close enough where it should look consistent within the entire scene. So right now, what I'll do is go back to Maya and kind of show you what you need to do in order to actually get this as accurate as possible. So light maps are funny. Light maps don't hold the same kind of convention that, say, a regular texture map would. Texture maps, obviously, you want to take advantage of the most amount of texture space you can, and you want to try to utilize your UVs in the best manner possible, right? Now with light maps, it's a little bit different, obviously, because you have what you want to do, especially for modularity. You have one set of pieces here that all need to match in textile density, so you can't alter them too much. You can't set this as 64 and enlarge it and blow it up, and then have this piece here, we'll say this piece here, which takes up more of the UV space just because it's a larger piece of geometry, and then kind of shrink that down so all of those pieces can fit, because you're going to end up with two varying texel densities, and if they've got to match up and butt up right next to each other, you're going to notice that as soon as a shadow starts dragging across this piece to this piece. Now there are some ways where you can make this one say 128 and this one 64, and then adjust the size of the pieces of geometry accordingly. However, that's a lot of work, and you really got to think about the texel density, and you've got to do some calculations, right? So the quick and easy way to do this is just to make everything 64 and shrink these down to a spot that matches the spots that are next to it, right? So how do we do that? The best way to do that, and I've found personally, is to combine all of the objects that are in a set. So I know I've got these all in a set. They've all got to butt up close to each other, and they've all got to be relatively close in texel density. So what I'll do is combine them as an object, as a single object, and just import them directly into my UV texture editing program, which I use Hedis UV layout tools. So what that'll do is basically, so now we've got a textured set of this balcony, and they're all the same exact texel density. So I've actually laid out the entire set for this entire smaller section of balcony, right? So they're all going to take relatively the same amount of texel density and be consistent among this one modular set. So now we go back to the UVs, and you can see I've kind of laid out each little piece, and what I'm not going to do is I won't let UV layout tools, I won't let it pack my UVs. I will do the packing myself, because once I export this back into my 3D modeling program, back into Maya, what I end up with is a giant bunch of UVs that are kind of scattered out all over the grid. And what I need to do, I use Nightshade UV editor, but there's any number of tools that you can use to do this. When I import these back in, let's get a normal texture here so we can. So when we import these back in, we're not going to get perfect UVs, right? So let's go and look at one example right now of one of the pieces that I have set up for export here. If I can find one, let me see. I didn't export it, or what? What's happening here? Excuse me. Okay, hold on one second. Let me figure out. Okay, so let's go ahead and export. Could have swore I may have actually deleted it. So, all right. So what I'll do here is run you right through kind of one quick set of UVs. This would be for the large balcony. Where is that? That's for this. Oh, okay. So that's what I've done here. Okay. So yeah, I've only textured the one single balcony set. So we'll go through here real quick and decide how we want these seamed up. Basically, for any kind of seams, what you want to do is avoid putting seams like that. You want to avoid that as much as possible, because if you split a flat surface in half, you very well may end up the way you may end up with a seam. In certain lighting conditions, it just isn't very good to do that. So what we'll do here is just split this down the center here. Basically, you want to try to keep your seams on corners and places where if you do get a seam, it's not going to be a huge deal. It's not going to be a deal breaker. So we'll go in. This is going to be kind of a long process, so I'll try to speed up the video here and show it while it's done. piece. Let's put each one of these in its own square, right? Now, let's take these and just enlarge them. And actually, probably the best way to do this would have been to incorporate the destruction assets into this set as well, so that we're scaling all uniformly across the destruction and the clean version of these assets. So probably technically this is not the best way to do it, because if we were being very thorough, we would definitely include the destruction set with this scaling process that we're using right now. And that looks like about as big as we're going to be able to go for our light maps. So like I was explaining before, we're going to end up with a tiny little light map just for this one little, or a huge light map. It's basically 128 space just for this one little piece right here. And that's really unfortunate, but I can't see a better way of utilizing light maps so that they're all uniform. If I'm wrong and there's a different way to approach this, I'd love to hear it, because I really hate having to do this. It's really unfortunate, but I don't see any way around it other than just building your assets less modular and less and leaving your designer, your level designer, less options for kind of varying up the modular sets. So I don't know. I guess that could be the way to do it. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're just gonna export these UVs the way they are. No big deal. We're going to just overwrite that file because we've already used those UVs. And essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to just do a quick transfer, right? We can actually delete this. This was the previous import, so we're just going to delete that. We're going to import the UVs that we just created. Kind of far there. So there's the UVs we just created, and as you can see, there's the majority of our stuff, and the stuff we're looking for is right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to split this mesh back up. I think we deleted the last one. Let me just make sure here real quick. Looks like there's two sets of geometry, but that's probably just my camera. Yeah, just my camera. Okay. So what we're going to do here is just take all of these and separate them and delete the geometry we're not going to use for this specific UV transfer. We're going to delete these two, and we're going to delete these just to clean up the scene so we know we're not messing with anything else. So this is all we're left with right now. Again, like I say, this was really kind of a waste of time because I'm going to have to redo these and include the flat walls that you saw just there, and the walls, the destruction variants of those same walls. So, but this is the process that you're using, that you're going to need to use in order to do this. Okay, so after we separate, we're going to have to recombine some of these assets here. That looks like one piece still. That should be one piece, and these corner pieces. So we have to recombine those real quick. And now we've got our UV'd set here. Now, as you can tell, they're not perfectly set to the grid. Like, these are not, this vertical line here isn't set to the grid. If you were to hold it up there, hold it up to one of the grid lines here, you would see that it's off kilter. So what we're going to do is a couple things here. First, we're going to take this. Let's take this first set right here, right? We're going to take this, we're going to slide it over here. Then we're going to go to our handy dandy tool here, and I don't think I've actually explained this yet, but here's how we have the grid set up in the UV texture editor. Basically, for whatever resolution that you're going to take, you're going to use that as the denominator in a division problem. Divide just by 1, right? Or divide 1 by whatever resolution you're actually, the smallest light map resolution that you're going to be using. Because what you're going to want to do is all of these, where you see these grids, you're going to want to line up your UV seams along a grid line. You're not going to want to, kind of like you see here, this is kind of in the middle of a grid, or not really in the middle, but it's not on a grid line. So what's going to happen in the light map is, if you can picture four corners here as being having a value of either light or dark, it's going to interpolate between this one pixel. This is actually just a pixel because we're dealing with a 64 by 64 resolution, and there are actually 64 grid squares across here. This, if you can envision this as a pixel, you're actually going to interpolate between these four corners here, between whether it's a black or a white portion of that. So if you have something that should be shaded, your light map should be shaded, and it's shading part of it, and it's trying to blend with its adjacent pixels, it's not going to catch all of that blending. So what's going to happen is you're just going to get an ugly seam, depending on what portion of that pixel was actually being shaded. So what you want to try to do is, everywhere where you have a UV seam or a UV border, you want to shore it up to a grid line, right? And sometimes that's going to mean you're going to distort the UV map just a tiny bit, but that's actually a far better trade-off than having these kind of unsightly seams that you're going to end up with now. Now, on some of these areas, like within the model itself, depending on if you have a really hard corner here, some of these I may actually drag out to take advantage of a full texture square. It's going to really distort my compress whatever image space is in here. But for, say, this right here, I am actually just going to carry this edge all the way to a seam, or all the way to a grid point, right? And like I say, that's going to do some weird stuff with my with the rest of my light map resolution over here. But it's more important to me that I have a seamless angle right here when I mix it with the rest of these kind of side pieces here. So you have to play around with it. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's unnecessary. It depends on which part's in shadow and which part's in light. But more often than not, I've found personally that it's usually better to take advantage of one full pixel. Now, what you can do for this specifically, I'm probably not going to do that because I know that I'm using 128. So 128, I can pretty much match to every other square, every other grid line, or I'm sorry, every 0.5 grid line. So at every half mark, I know that it's going to make sense for a 128 because this is set up for a 64, and these are going to indeed be 128. So that's how I'll set this up. All lines are going to end up. I use the Nightshade UV editor, and basically it's a really simple setting to square everything up. It won't square everything up to pixel, or to well, yes, to pixel, but to the grid, but it will get you started on creating very straight edges, and that it automates the process a little bit. You lose a little bit of the like right here, I lost a little bit of my resolution in there, and this one's actually completely gone. I'm not sure what happened there, but yeah, you just gotta keep an eye on it and make sure you fix whatever errors it generates afterwards. But yeah, so that's that. And actually, it looks like it kind of condensed this whole upper angle, which isn't a big deal. But yeah, light mapping UVs can take just as long as your regular diffuse UVs. Just real quick, if yeah, this is actually one real quick note worth a mention here. This is already kind of a longer video than I planned, but when you're looking at your grid options for your UV texture, I'm not sure if I mentioned this or not. but you actually have 4 points of precision there, and it'll actually take at least 6. It probably may take more than 6. It won't display any more than 4 points of precision, but you can actually input that into the. You can actually input this is just for the 64-bit or 64 by 64 resolution light maps. That's the number that I plugged directly in there, and it only displays 4-point precision, but it'll actually take 6. If you try to just give it a 4-point precision, you're going to end up with a grid that's slightly off, and you'll actually notice that it's slightly off because it won't sit directly on the axis over here. So when you go to check out, it'll look slightly off, like all the grid lines will be just slightly off. And you want to make sure that you're actually left with the appropriate number of grid points. I actually physically and deliberately kind of went in and counted each grid square like a crazy person because I was really nervous that I was going to be not left with the correct amount of pixels. But that's that, and that's light mapping. So basically, essentially, setting up the second UV channel is pretty easy. I think everybody pretty much knows how to handle that situation, but if you don't, basically it's just you would whichever piece of geometry that you're working on at the time, you basically select it, go in here. This one's already got a second set, but you would go in here, create an empty UV set, and either you can directly work in that UV set, or what I like to do is kind of non-destructively work on a spare set of assets and then just transfer the UV maps by using the transfer attributes feature in Maya, and then clear history. So that's pretty much it. There's a whole lot more to light mapping, and there's a whole lot more tweaks and kind of BS you're going to have to handle inside of Unreal. And sometimes a lot of what I've just said doesn't work exactly. So you got to go in and adjust your UV edges kind of wherever they make sense to adjust them. You have to kind of play it by ear. It's not a perfect system quite yet. So like for these, I think I'm done with the UV tweaks, but I'm very clearly going to have to make some world setting adjustments here on the light mask settings. So there's pretty scattered ambient occlusion there, and it looks pretty splotchy in some areas. The outside looks alright, but the places in shadow and dark shadow are looking pretty grimy. Might be able to keep it like that because for now the back of these objects aren't really too big of an issue. We're mostly concerned with the front. So yeah. And also, honestly, you can go in and edit your light maps. If you really want to get crazy and anal about it, you can actually physically find them within the game files and just physically alter them yourselves. So that's that. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks a lot.